Hi everyone, welcome to ESG Training and Literacy Basic Awareness module. I'm here with the Parvate guys who do the ESG training and literacy. ESG is a very important topic for everyone at this point in time, and we're recording both a video and a podcast for this. So if you're watching on the video, the slides will come up on the video, and if you're listening to a podcast, there'll be a link below where you can actually refer to the slides that go along with this. I want to welcome firstly Paul Gaudoin from Parvate.
Thanks, John.
And Jim Allenby.
Thanks, John.
These two guys are going to walk you through the slide deck and explain to you in basic terms where we're at with ESG. I may pop in with some random questions along the way, and we'll go from there. Welcome.
Thanks, John. I think first point is to make around this sort of training module. This is a real basic literacy and awareness module. This isn't a real deep dive into ESG, but more an idea of a bit of the process of ESG, what it actually is, how we're doing it down at Parvate. And I think we're all seeing in the marketplace, society in general, ESG is a big topic now. It's not going away, and certainly at Parvate we see it as a real positive for business if you get it right. So just wanted to intro that with we're going to cover quite a few topics in just a little bit of detail here, and the ongoing series will go into a bit more detail.
Fabulous.
So just going on to the first slide here, environmental, social and governance make up the acronym ESG. There will be a few acronyms through this process, but please bear with us as we explain them best we can. Environmental is quite topical at the moment with net zero emissions. Various other sustainable initiatives are very popular at the moment and in the news daily. So we can see 4 or 5 different sort of micro topics there on environmental, but certainly net zero is a really big consideration at the moment. Greenhouse gas emissions are huge. The carbon economy and the carbon market, carbon emissions are big topics as well. We go to the social pillar, and once again, huge coming out of COVID. Social, not just for society in general, but certainly in the workforce, workers' conditions, diversity, workplace health and safety, and a number of really important topics there are in social. And then we go to governance or leadership as we often refer to it. We see sort of board performance, board ethics, management styles, making sure we're looking after people there. I think in governance is a really important topic. And something I'll just say here, when we look at this slide, which is a few of the many topics in ESG, there's nothing there that companies, groups, organisations probably shouldn't be doing anyway. And a lot of the time what we're noticing is they're already doing it and doing it quite well. ESG is a good way to sort of capture that all in one place.
It's probably a good add, Jim, at this stage. ESG has probably been evolved from corporate social responsibility into potentially non-financial disclosures and some financial disclosures as well. So there's been a little bit of an evolution, and it's becoming well regarded or known as ESG.
Right. Just to sort of backtrack you a slight amount there, so some of these requirements are already in place in European countries, and so how do we, I guess without sort of hopping ahead and getting too deep into it, how do you see, is that what timeline do you think that's going to be for Australian organisations to actually understand where they need to go?
Very good question, and something we get asked a lot. Europe and the USA are leading this. I think the Northern Hemisphere are quite well developed in their ESG metrics, disclosures, expectations. Currently it is linked to finance, which is, as we say to clients and people we work with, it isn't the only reason for doing ESG, but it's a pretty good one. And I think certainly Europe, USA, they're probably a few years ahead of us. Now we're catching up slowly as the metrics and disclosures become more uniform. So I would say the second half of this year, it's going to be quite hard to access capital without some sort of ESG performance or report or at least a roadmap for what we're going to be doing in the future. So I think I could quite confidently say by the end of this year, there's going to be some fairly robust procedures that need to be followed, and we certainly encourage companies to get a start on it now while it's a bit more sort of lower maintenance, before it becomes something that sort of halts business a bit while everyone's all hands on deck on ESG only.
Righto, thanks Jim.
And just moving ahead to the next slide, if you're watching this, it is ESG training and literacy basic awareness module. There's a content page here. What we're going to go through, firstly, the ESG process, and that's something we're doing sort of regularly at the moment and developing as this sort of subject and thematic certainly develops at a rapid pace. We're keeping up to date with this, and the process of how you do ESG is something we get asked a lot. Then we're going to move into the audit process, so audit and roadmap perhaps. Then we've got ESG reporting. I think a lot of people who are interested in ESG are seeing companies coming out with their ESG report, so we've got a few bits on that we'd like to discuss. And then we go into some ESG learning topics. We can see sort of 9 topics there. At each stage of this presentation, we'll be looking at these sort of micro learnings. And we see some in environmental, some in social, and some in governance there. And we're seeing, a number of, I guess, the most popular topics we get asked for. We're just going to touch on those today as well.
Great.
I think now we're looking at the Parvate ESG process. And this is a process that we've not just made up on the spot. This is based on looking at best practice in larger organisations, smaller organisations, not-for-profits, listed companies, mining supplies companies, and certainly access to capital through our partners at Eden Funds. So this process is certainly based on an understanding of different sizes of business. We see a sort of circular diagram that a lot of people who have been in business for a while will hopefully appreciate how we've looked to put this together. The ESG process is very much based around the baseline. Number one is around an audit and a review of current ESG performances or current ESG metrics that are being undertaken. Something to point out here that I think is really important is a lot of companies, when they see these metrics, they do look like there is a lot of metrics there, and it can sometimes look a little bit overwhelming. I think something that we've been really pleased about is a company or a group or an organisation will do this initial audit and review process and then quite easily be able to capture this data when they need to. And certainly that's been something that's been really pleasing to see a company become aware that they're doing ESG a bit better than what they thought. And that's been really pleasing at the start of this journey.
It's probably fair to say this audit phase as well is a big part of the education and awareness of what ESG is. And so whilst we're capturing information, we're also educating, in particular their leaders, but also their staff on what ESG is. So it's not just about capturing the data, it's about educating and informing the organisation as to what it really is.
Yeah, right. Thank you. I've had a look at that ESG questionnaire, and I think it is very informative. So it takes all levels of the organisation through a bit of a readiness program so that you do get an understanding of what is going to be needed or could be potentially needed in the long term. And I think that's a very important part of that process. That Q&A there helps people understand it, and it does demystify and simplify where it's going, and it's not such an ogre. And I think that sort of reporting is going to be very helpful, and that's an important first step.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, I hear Paul say it a lot, and me as well. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. This process is not just around getting some data and metrics. This is around understanding what it is and understanding how it can improve a business and help a business, not just tie someone up in compliance for hours on end. This is about making some good tangible actions and using data to back it up. So there's not much in high performance that doesn't follow those lines.
Probably worth adding, leadership within an organisation doesn't necessarily have to know everything within ESG, but they have to have an awareness of it. And if we're in supporting and consulting, we need their buy-in and support to help assist the organisation to then prepare, which becomes the second phase, which is the roadmap and strategy phase as well.
Yeah, and I think just touching on the roadmap and strategy, that's the bit where a company can get some great value out of setting up for the future. And I think the initial data is really important. The awareness and education is really important. And then it's understanding what the outcome an organisation or a group or a company would like, so that you can set up a strategy and a roadmap to improve and reach these these goals. It's basic goal setting. You set a target and you do what you need to do to achieve it. And certainly coming out of of performance like myself and Paul have, we've really noticed companies and execs, leaders are really, they can really buy into that, and they can understand if they see direct actions, getting direct results, then they're really enjoying this process. So that's the roadmap and strategy, number 2 part of this.
Just adding on that, Jim, I think it's probably worth adding that it's quite a pragmatic approach as well. There's often a little bit of fear of the unknown. With putting a strategy in place. It's not about a pass or fail at this stage. It's about showing that you can improve and you've got a roadmap to development. That may take years, but that's okay as long as there's a defined sort of strategy that you can work towards. So companies can often be quite fearful at the start of something that they don't know.
Sure.
We try and make sure that they understand that it's about development over a period of time.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and then sort of that roadmap strategy phase leads into the number 3, which is ESG metrics and disclosures, and it's about executing the disclosures that need to be executed. And although ESG is not just about compliance, there is some compliance there. We do need to see some tangible results. We do need to see some data. The metrics that are used are often based on the outcome required. So, the larger the organisation, generally the more metrics that need to be achieved as a rule of thumb. And, there is a lot of different reporting standards. So matching up the right reporting standards to the right stage of business is a really big part of this as well, and certainly forms part of the strategy. And I think surprisingly for a lot of people, and we're going to touch on this shortly, the ESG report we've got here as number 4, so the last part of the process. And we'll go into a bit more detail as to why that's after audit, review, roadmap, strategy, and then defining and deciding metrics and disclosures, because it's a really great tool if used correctly.
Excellent.
And I'll just hand over to Paul here with the Parvate audit process. It's taken a lot of, I'm happy to say it's taken a lot of time, and we've had a few versions of this as ESG as a topic and as an industry has evolved, and staying ahead of this has really sort of formed part of our baseline audit and discovery process.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I mean, as I said, this is a big part of education and awareness through the audit or discovery phase. In essence, we're looking for a baseline position for the company in terms of ESG metrics. It provides some early information for us to then assist with the strategy formation for their ESG performance. There's education involved. We can also re-audit periodically as well, but it gives us a reference point to work through in the future, and it takes the fear out of the process. So once we get information, it's a lot easier to work through versus that unknown, and these results are for strategy and to develop improvement within the company. So in terms of what we do, we will go in, we will provide the metrics, we will support through a consulting phase to the organisation, work through the metrics, make sure that they understand them, and then basically infill where the company sits in many of these, and from there then it moves into the next phase. And I guess just talking about the audit, our metrics, where have they come from? There's a massive corporate reporting landscape out there, a number of frameworks, a number of governing principle bodies. We certainly have looked at many of them, and we have customised our own to make it simple, but to make sure we are capturing the right metrics or the right items or pieces of information that we need in order for that company to improve their ESG performance. And so we have taken bits and pieces from many of the reporting frameworks and placed it into our own reporting our auditing framework.
And I think if I can just touch on that there as well, Paul, it's evolving so quickly. The metrics that we used 12 months ago, they are different now. And back to your point at the start, there will be a set benchmark, there will be a uniform standard for ESG reporting. It may not be for 6, 12, 18 months, but I guess when you're researching this every day, the clues are being put out there by the different organisations, and I'm not going to go through each one of the acronyms out of respect for the readers and listeners, but it's certainly, the clues are out there. a very good clue to follow is access to capital. The pension funds, the banks, they have certain criteria they need to see achieved in order to lend or loan money or access to capital. So we're certainly looking at that in close detail and in daily talks with funds. We have a partner fund in-house as well as the banks we're working with as well. So just to back Paul's point up there on the reporting metrics we use, it isn't that we've just made them up and guessed. It's very much about gaining all this information and reading so many hours of metrics and acronyms and numbers to get to a point where we can simplify it and make it as straightforward as possible to get some great results.
Yeah, I think, and in Australia, it's an evolving landscape. They're probably looking very closely at what's happening in Europe. I know in 2023, which we've just rolled into now, there are specific things that they have to comply with, and I think that's probably the tell for us as to where things are going to land. And then as you quite rightly point out, the Australian experience is going to evolve, and we'll be across that as it takes place, I guess.
Yeah, and I think often, many of the organisations have a lot of this information already. Mm-hmm. Just needs to be sort of extracted from their data and from their records, I guess, and that's a good sign. Then we sort of make sure that we've got the information we need to then form the strategy and roadmap from there.
I guess just touching on an audit example, Paul, do you just want to go through sort of it's not badged up with any company's information, obviously, but here's sort of one page of what a company may see as a bit of output that they get back.
Yeah, I think, this is from the social aspect, from different pillars or different metrics, would include diversity and inclusion within your workforce. This one shows, the gender pay equality, is it there, wage levels, etc. So this is just a sample from the social pillar, if you like, and the workforce and how that is being administered within your organisation. Very simply, it's a starting point for an organisation, and from there you can develop and build your strategy.
And now we're looking at an ESG report. As mentioned at the start, a lot of organisations are coming out with an ESG report. And just to look at a few reasons why a company may use an ESG report, and just something to consider if you are considering that. So I think a really great use of an ESG report is all this data, information, disclosures, reporting metrics. It's a way of housing this in one place that can then be seen publicly. Asking a stakeholder group or an investment group to look through your website, social media, various end-of-year accounts, things like that, is quite difficult. But an ESG report is quite a good way of making all this information accessible publicly. And just another point, ESG disclosures and metrics are about what's publicly available, not what you keep in-house. So we see a lot of companies use an ESG report to make sure the data they've collected and their ESG performance is transparent and it's for all to see. So ESG reporting is a great way to put this all in one area that makes it easier to follow, easier to find. It goes without saying, it can be a great marketing tool as well. We see these reports, they do have nice pictures on them, they do show all the good a company's doing in the community, and it's absolutely fantastic to see. Because now with the way ESG is going, you need to back that up with action as well. It's not just about turning up for 2 hours, taking a photo with some people in the jurisdiction you're mining or something like that. It's about actually making positive change. So it is a great way to market the company and all that they're doing. And investors, staff and potential staff members, they like to see that a company's ESG savvy. So certainly we'll be touching on the staff internally in an organisation as well, because this is a really important topic for a lot of people. And just the last point to say, we do strongly advise a company starts with an awareness and audit process before moving into an ESG report. We feel it's responsible of the leaders or board of a company to make sure that the report is going to be accurate, it's going to tell the truth, and it's going to be backed with data. So just making sure you understand what it is that we're going to be talking about and telling the public is really important right from the start. So understanding what ESG is and some of the metrics we might cover might be a better way of going than commissioning an ESG report as a first step.
Thank you.
So one of the things that adds value to a company's ESG performance is knowing about ESG, but then also being able to filter that information throughout your organisation. One of the things that we do at Parvate is assist not only with audit and report, but we add value through learning modules that we can facilitate and present to organisations. Probably 3 levels of that. We would look at a learning module that is tailored to executives and partners, which are very much overarching modules and awareness. To middle management, we would also be able to present to them and also their staff as well, which is probably a little bit more extended in terms of the understanding. Ultimately, what these modules and learning activities do is help assist with alignment of understanding and alignment of focus throughout a company. So that's important to us. If we're going to see real change with ESG within a company, it's got to be, as we know from sport and high performance, there has to be alignment throughout the organisation in order for that to be effective. Execution is crucial within that, so we support with communication and collaboration on understanding these ESG topics and then what we can do about them. And then obviously it helps to review and upskill periodically over a period of time, one, to keep it in the forefront of their minds, but to make sure that it is a realistic goal that is able to be achieved. So we support that as well.
And I think just to add on to that, the process that's been set up there by Paul from his coaching and teaching background as well as his understanding of ESG is this topic is evolving, so that the review and upskill periodically piece of this process is really important. In 3 months' time, we're probably going to see renewed strategies. The government's going to come out with new climate mandates. This is evolving, not weekly, but certainly monthly, quarterly, yearly. There's going to be a constant evolution of ESG as a topic and what it means to each business, and the way that we can keep the executives or partners or principals of a company up to date with the micro learning in a small bite-sized piece, understanding everyone's very busy, and then looking at sort of middle management, understanding in a bit more detail, then staff being the real drivers of change. Because as I mentioned previously, staff are very interested in ESG as a topic and how it affects their lives at work but also at home. So trying to really get that alignment from leadership all the way down throughout the organisation, and then from the organisation staff back up. And we're seeing some great, not pushback, but certainly discussions amongst organisations where the board execs and staff are talking about ESG now, and it's really pleasing for us to see the buy-in and seeing people consider it in their day-to-day lives in and out of work.
Just a selfish question, will we get PDRs for doing this work?
Yeah, and
professional development.
It can be a selfish or just an interesting question. Yes, absolutely. We're working with some quite high-end organisations now in the legal space, accounting space, banks, and they're using this as professional development hours. I think one organisation that will be in a following podcast are up to 10 hours so far of doing this, and really pleasing as they've enjoyed it. So not just compliance, not just sitting there getting told what you already know.
Yep.
Hopefully an interesting way of learning something new.
Good news.
As here we move into our first sort of micro learning module. This can be done as a one-off, as an environmental, but certainly being the really topical part of ESG, environmental is a massive part of a company's considerations going forward. So here we see greenhouse gas emissions. Anyone who's probably read much about greenhouse gas emissions and Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions is probably as confused as I was at the start when we first heard this, these different levels of emissions. Certainly a few years ago I just thought emissions were emissions and you counted them or you didn't. But certainly looking at this from a way that it's measured from a compliance point of view, stakeholders, governments, and now financial institutions are really considering this to be a big part of future planning and certainly part of ESG. So really simply, once again, we'll look at Scope 1 emissions. They're direct emissions, direct from source, controlled by the company. So we're going to use some really simple examples. So transport from the combustion of fuel in a fleet vehicle owned by the company. So directly linked back to the company, directly for company's use. We move into Scope 2 emissions. which are indirect emissions. So starting to get a little bit more difficult to follow as we get down to scope 2 and 3. And certainly there's going to be a constant evolution of what constitutes scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. And this could be the energy that's developed at an outside facility that you use in the business. So a power station has a lot of emissions to produce the power that you use to turn the lights on. That's going to be considered scope 2 and something that is already being considered as part of your emission statements and emission accounting, and something to consider for the future, potential ways of capturing this. And then we move into the murky world of scope 3 emissions. This is becoming quite difficult for companies to measure because what we're seeing is no one wants to claim the emissions. So a lot of the time this is passed down the supply chain. And just trying to make sure a company's aware of this going forward in the future. Scope 3 emissions are going to be included in your carbon counting, your greenhouse gas emissions counting. And that could be simply your employees driving from home to work, which, it's a really difficult one to get your head around as an organisation and leaders of a company. But in the future, and maybe not too distant future, we're going to have to account for things like, your employee catches the train to work, how many people are on the train, divide it by that. And it's going to become quite difficult, and luckily software is catching up with this, but just to give a basic understanding of emissions there, and what scope 2 and 3 means to a company, it's certainly a future consideration for some and a now consideration for others. But just that initial understanding of it and being able to certainly hold that conversation around greenhouse gas emissions is something we're seeing as a really important tool for leaders of a business.
So we're going with company-issued e-scooters all around then?
Well, I'd like to think so, John. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we're going to have to account for how the battery was made.
Yes,
but,
right.
But of course, yeah, I think we get on the battery scooters. Certainly, you'd look good on that.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
And I think just swiftly moving into on the same subject, I guess, as emissions. So a TCFD, first acronym of the day. The TCFD is a Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and this essentially is to not simplify it too much, this is a framework organisation use to look at the future risks of climate-related issues that can have on the business. So we'll divide it into two different subsets. So there's the actual physical risk to a company from climate change. That could be floods, heating, various other issues that we're seeing with climate change out there at the moment. So that the obvious one is the heat and the flooding and the weather. For example, as a business you have an office near the coast and the coastline's eroding. You need to consider the future impacts on the business of the potential insurance going up because of that, and also the physical harm that it may do. And then we look at the transition into a low carbon economy. It's not going to be cheap. We're seeing that. It's becoming more expensive to do business. Certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, energy costs are going up. I think in Australia, they're certainly going up as well. So we need to consider the financial impacts of climate change in the future. Forward-looking accounts are going to have to account for a certain percentage of increased operating costs. There's certain bits of business we can't do because it's going to produce too many emissions. So the climate-related risks, the TCFD process is well developed and well used worldwide. Our opinion here at Parvate ESG is this is going to be a really important subsection of ESG is this TCFD, and certainly looking at risk in all aspects of the business. This is probably quite an important one to consider for leaders of a company. So this slide, the TCFD slide, if you're watching or looking at this, it gives just a really nice, simple explanation of the risk and whether it's a potential financial impact, whether it's a physical risk or whether it's a risk of the changing economy and changing legislation.
Right.
Yeah, in terms of an example of a learning module for the social pillar, one learning module or area that we look at is psychological safety and risk mitigation. One thing that has changed dramatically within legislation in the past year or so, and obviously on the back of COVID, psychological safety has risen, but legislatively it's up to 50% of the work health and safety now is in regards to psychological safety, whereas previously it's probably 80-90% physical. The psychological pieces has risen dramatically, so it has a massive weight within an organisation to make sure that they have a risk strategy in place for their psychological safety and minimising psychological hazards within an organisation. Psychosocial hazards, the workplace interactions, are anything in the design or management of work that increases the risk of work-related stress. So stress is the thing that we're trying to minimise, and that's an important piece. So the healthier, the wellness piece for our staff is going to be crucially important going forward. It's not just about minimising the hazards, but we actually try to encourage a better wellness within an organisation as well. And as an example, some of the stats show that the financial cost of losing people in terms of absenteeism from work due to stress can be exorbitant, and a number of weeks away from work then you're having to sort of cover. So there's a lot of factors that also attribute to the performance of a company in terms of the psychological safety of their staff. Interestingly, the stats show that women at the moment report more than men, which is maybe something that people might expect, and you can discuss the reasons why that might be, but the reality is there is more reporting of mental illness and mental health being a concern within organisations, and so one of the parts of that social pillar is to how we support our staff from a psychological wellness perspective.
And I think just to jump in here and having sat through a number of times seeing Paul deliver this to management groups, boards of directors and partnership groups, it's been a really eye-opening sort of session or lesson for these people and these groups, and there's been a huge amount of engagement, and not only to see the risks and to make sure that they're keeping their current staff healthy and happy and obviously increasing performance. It also, if a group or organisation is taking this seriously, it's certainly a way of attracting staff as well, and making sure you're a workplace of choice. And as we're seeing in the market at the moment, we want ESG to be a little bit about performance as well, obviously. And if we're an organisation that takes this seriously, we're going to find attracting and retaining staff a really key part of this. And just for anyone watching or listening to this, the psychological safety and risk mitigation module that'll be released shortly is certainly something I'd encourage anyone to look at, and it goes into a bit more of a deeper dive into some of these topics and explains them in a bit more detail.
Very good.
And here we sort of the last pillar for today is on governance. Like I said at the start, we see governance certainly as leadership, ethics, and a number of other things. Governance can mean a number of different things to different organisations and different people. I guess the topic today that we've chosen is around diversity and inclusion. We see on the side here, if you're watching, a lot of these are linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN's SDGs, yet another acronym. And we're seeing the point is to reduce inequalities and to make sure whether that's gender, whether that's race, whether that's identification, whether that's religious affiliation, but also where you sit within an organisation, whether you're a leader, whether you're a staff member, whether you're a manager, sort of your social identity, professional identity. It's not just about male, female and race only. This is very much it's a diversity of thought, and it's to be inclusive so that everyone can feel like they're welcome in an environment, but also like they're being listened to in an environment as well. They're being respected, they feel connected to each other in the organisation, and they have a chance of progressing as much as anyone else. So I think, my view, and certainly shared throughout Parvate before sort of Paul jumps in and adds into this, this is not just about male, female or race identification or it isn't as simple as that. diversity and inclusion is very much about everyone feeling like they have an equal chance of developing through the organisation, and they're being heard as much as anyone. And we certainly encourage a diversity of thought as much as any other organisation, because that's how we're going to improve. So Paul may have a bit more of a strategic view of that, or certainly a bit more direct way of explaining it, but just to sort of our feelings on it and our views on it are very much around including and promoting.
I think a simple example is a more diverse board will contain a broader range of knowledge within them and an awareness, and thus they have a better chance of making more informed and aware decisions than a less diverse board. So I think that gives a good example of why that's beneficial to organisations. Increasing creativity, innovation, different thoughts is an important part for improving performance within an organisation.
And certainly, a criticism of ESG at the start, the term greenwashing around environmental claims that weren't met, or just making rogue statements that had no background. Certainly the criticism was around the same with diversity as well. It was seen as tokenism to put certain different types of people on a board. But it's just not appropriate or acceptable to do that. It really is around the performance of the board and making sure that if we are adding people from diverse and a wide range of backgrounds, we're setting them up to succeed and setting them up some support around them. Certainly at Parvate, we believe strongly in that, and a lot of the previous topic that Paul mentioned on psychosocial safety as well, that links into this topic as well, and as you can tell, we're very passionate about it, and we see some great improvements when people get this right.
I just wanted to jump in there as well. I think the European examples as well show where they're very far along this path compared to Australia. Measure the board's performance against their ESG targets. There's a lot of metrics and measurement, both from internal or from various stakeholders that measure up against these things as well. So this is not just an arbitrary, let's have a bit of a board matrix here and pick out a few, cherry pick some things off. This is in a larger organisation in the European, and I think there's 50,000 organisations that are currently reporting into this. There are a lot of metrics, there are a lot of measurements, there's a lot of external input into this. So this is a much more stringent, and I don't know whether that's going to evolve into the Australian landscape or not, but that's certainly the way that it's evolved over there, and especially in the international companies. And I think it's very interesting to see what they use in terms of policy development, measuring back to, and how this all works. And I think that's a really important part of the process. Also, anti-corruption, money laundering, all those sorts of things, all those policies and everything need to be in place, and that's a big deal. And I think that's certainly the best case example of how those things should work.
Absolutely agree, yeah, and you're right, it is developing and it will continue to develop, and we need to keep up with it. So just looking at a few future topics and some of our other sort of micro-learning modules, certainly want to highlight a few here. So I think ESG/green finance, there's no doubt finance is being linked to ESG. We're seeing sustainable investments, we're seeing ESG funds, we're seeing pension funds unable to invest in companies that aren't doing ESG. So we've got a bit of a deeper dive into the ESG green finance world, and we're fortunate to have experts in this field in-house who will be coming on and going into quite a bit of detail here, and certainly that's a big part of our mandate as an organisation is to bring the absolute best we can to this podcast and our learning modules. We're looking at ESG and purpose that I think we've really successfully ingrained through a few of our clients and a few of our partners, and Paul goes into a lot more detail there. Employee wellbeing we've touched on today, and we have a deeper dive and a bit more detail there. Occupational health and safety, mine safety management, things like that can all fall under ESG, and we have an expert in this field who's worked with a number of our partners and clients too. The carbon market, carbon literacy, as a group at Parvate, we've done the course ourselves, as well as sort of obviously further reading and further information on that, and we have access to specialists in the carbon field as well. The renewables/energy efficiency, one of our partner firms is a worldwide leader in renewables in Gale Tech Energy, based out of Ireland and working through the EU as well as Australia. So a nice introduction from them as well. And then just looking at ESG litigation. So, as I mentioned, greenwashing is a big concern and is something that's very, very topical in the media at the moment. We have an ESG litigation specialist from Perth who's going to talk to that in more detail. But certainly we've delivered an online learning and an in-person learning module with him, and it was fascinating. Also fascinating to deliver anything to lawyers because you get questioned very stringently, and it's great for our own development. So there's just a few topics that we've covered already and that we talk about day to day. And we have specialists and partners who really come in from a high-end perspective here and equally share the passion we have for this. So please feel free to look at the menu and choose as much of that as you can, because it's all interesting stuff. It's broken down into some smaller bite-sized pieces, and then we have the option of deep diving as well.
Righto. Okay, thanks Jim, thanks Paul for your chat today. I hope that's helped you on the beginning of your ESG journey. Please leave any comments or questions you have with us. We will put the links to the information in the boxes below, and happy to feedback and take further questions if you think there's things that you would like to know more about, or if you have any ways for improvement. We're open to feedback, and please subscribe to our podcast, and we hope to chat to you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
The content of this podcast is intended to be general in nature and is not personal financial product advice. It does not address the circumstances of any individual or entity. You should not construe any of this information or other part of the material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other professional advice. Parvate is not a financial advisor. You should consider seeking independent legal, financial, taxation, or other advice to check how any information relates to your unique circumstances. Nothing contained in the podcast constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by Parvate or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments in this or any other jurisdiction in which solicitation or offer would be unlawful under the securities laws of such jurisdiction.